CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories this hour. Libya's top prosecutor vows to investigate both current and previous governments for possible negligence after the floods that killed at least 11,000 people. Humanitarian aid still desperately needed in Morocco a week after a powerful earthquake devastated remote villages near Marrakesh. China calls for greater development through solidarity, reaffirming support for the Global South at a major summit in Havana. And we're in the ancient tea plantations of China's Jing Mai mountain, one of the sites nominated for UNESCO protected status. Efforts are underway to seal off the Libyan city of Derna amid fears of disease spreading. It comes nearly a week after it was hit by a deluge of water from 2 collapsed dams, leaving more than 11,000 people dead and thousands more missing. Bodies are continuing to wash up on shore, and it's thought many corpses remain buried under rubble. Libya's public prosecutor says an investigation has been launched into why the dams failed during intense rainfall caused by Storm Daniel.
We will be looking at the maintenance funds that were paid to manage these 2 dams and minimise damage from floods and heavy rainfall. The investigation is looking at local authorities as well as consecutive governments for negligence. It's also extremely important to identify all the victims and the causes of their deaths in order to preserve their rights, as well as to identify any possible negligence from authorities.
Our other top story, humanitarian needs remain very high in Morocco, a week after the devastating 6.8 magnitude earthquake which struck the high Atlas Mountains south of Marrakesh. Almost 3,000 people have been killed and thousands more are injured or displaced. Many are in desperate need of food and clean water and shelter. Our correspondent Ken Brown is in Amizmiz now for us. So Ken, how's the recovery operation going there?
Yes, we're here in one of the many hundreds of displaced camps that have been set up for people affected by this earthquake. We've seen few families here who have escaped death. All of them have lost their homes. We're looking at buildings just behind here that are on the point of collapsing. Moroccan NGOs say that almost 3,000 people have lost their lives, some 5,500 injured, and as many as 380,000 people affected. What was a rescue mission has now largely become a recovery and relief mission, trying to get humanitarian aid to the people who need it most. Of course, the terrain here has made it very difficult. High mountainous region with remote villages, some of which 7.5 days later haven't even been reached by the military or by any of the NGO helicopters. For example, we've heard stories of donkeys trying to get up there to bring some essential goods like food and water, entire villages sleeping outside. We have had some good news today, though. We've heard the WHO talk about how this region, the Al Haous region where we are right now, is under control in terms of health and safety. One of the things we've really seen here has been such a heartwarming response from the Moroccan people. We've prepared this report for you. Moroccan spirit. Moved by a tragedy that left a nation in shock, Moroccans have been organising a massive community response. Cars pull up to this camp for the displaced every few minutes to drop off essentials, toys, clothes and treats. Donations pile up at collection points that punctuate the National Road number 7 as it winds all the way to the epicentre. Many people make long journeys to help, like Leila, a Moroccan who has come all the way from her home in Germany to lend a hand.
Because I saw that people are really suffering and I had to do something, at least bring something to eat, cover, clothes, whatever, but help, just help.
Blankets, kitchenware, rugs and essentials. Ordinary Moroccans have taken relief efforts into their own hands in an outpouring of generosity to help those most in need. By night, the city mobilises and all of these goods are taken to the Atlas Mountains. The public response has been overwhelming, with thousands of people here answering a call to action on social media. Community leaders have emerged from this spontaneous humanitarian movement. They say the government response has been too slow and Moroccans have compensated for the shortfall.
The government should do more. Moroccans have big hearts, willing to share everything with you. In times of tragedy, Moroccans stand together. We didn't sleep or eat all day. Our appetite fades away when our brothers and sisters are starving.
A week on, the Red Cross estimates that over 300,000 people have been affected. A tragedy that has scarred the land has also inspired a moment of unity and solidarity. The Moroccan spirit sustaining a nation.
Ken, as you reported, a lot of donations and aid are now reaching the worst affected areas, but it's going to be a really long rebuilding process there, isn't it?
Absolutely, Paul. We've been hearing from one Moroccan economist today who's been putting the bill for all this damage at between $10 and $15 billion. We've seen a move of solidarity by the government, who are going to forego, many ministers and other officials are going to forego a month of their salary. Of course, that's not going to come anywhere near enough. There's going to be a huge rebuilding operation. The government speaking with the World Bank already. We had an emergency meeting between the government and the King on Thursday. Announcements were made that 50,000 homes are going to be rebuilt. We heard very specific numbers on grants, $250 per month for 12 months for the victims of the earthquake, $14,000 for people who have lost their homes, $8,000 for those who need to repair their homes. UNICEF says that over 100,000 children have been affected by this earthquake. And here in this camp, we've seen many kids here playing around. Their resilience, they're trying to make the best of what's happened. Of course, when night comes, that's a different story. At around 11 p.m, when this earthquake struck last Friday night, the kids, the fear sets in, and they say that many can't sleep, suffering from insomnia, also from nightmares. The healing process here in Morocco only just beginning, Paul.
Yeah, indeed. Ken, thank you very much for that. That's Ken Brown reporting live from Morocco. Hungary's population has been consistently falling in recent decades. The United Nations estimates it could shrink by a third by the year 2070. The situation is most visible in rural areas where some schools have been forced to close due to a lack of children. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports.
There's a town in northern Hungary where the sound of children's laughter is seldom heard. The only public playground in the village stands abandoned, a reminder of days when children used to play here.
The last time a child was born in this village was 9 years ago. I'm hopeful things will change in the future.
One of Hungary's tiniest towns, Gara, boasts a mere 44 residents, most of whom are over 50. Mayor Kovacs has been a lifelong resident of this town, and his office is located in the modest city hall, occupying the space where the school once stood. The school had to close because there were no more children.
This is where I used to sit as a child in class. The teacher used to stand there. This room was full of children.
That has changed in Gara and many towns like it, as families have become smaller.
It was typical in Hungary in the 1950s and 60s for women to have 8 or more children. Now they have 1 or 2, if any.
The Hungarian government has tried to boost the country's fertility rate by introducing a range of family support programs, including state grants and preferential loans for families. Despite these initiatives, the number of live births has remained fairly consistent at around 77,000 a year. The government acknowledges the disappointing statistics, but stands by its economic programs.
The number of babies born of Hungarian parents in Austria or in Germany is increasing fast. So we have an outflow of young people.
The northern Hungarian region where the town of Garab is located has experienced a significant population decrease, with 184,000 people lost according to the last census. Additionally, the number of people aged 65 or older has increased compared to the rest of the country. But it's not just fertility rates causing Hungary's population decline. Heinal Kiz's son, like many in his generation, left the country in his 20s to pursue better opportunities elsewhere.
Many young Hungarians wrestle internally with whether to remain or depart the country.
Critics of Hungary's population policies argue that there should be a stronger focus on improving working conditions and boosting the country's quality of life so people don't choose to leave. Many of those who emigrate are in their childbearing years, so unless changes are made, places like Garab risk becoming ghost towns. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Budapest.
The DPRK's leader Kim Jong-un has been inspecting Russian missile systems in Vladivostok, along with Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu. Kim was shown Moscow's latest weapon, the hypersonic Kinzhal. The pair also toured a frigate, part of Russia's Pacific Fleet. Kim has been in Russia since Wednesday on a visit aimed at boosting relations between the two countries. Iran's security forces have released the father of Mahsa Amini after briefly detaining him exactly a year after his daughter's death in police custody. Amjad Amini and his wife were planning to hold a memorial at her grave despite government warnings and a wave of arrests in the run-up to the anniversary. 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was arrested by Iran's so-called morality police for allegedly flouting mandatory dress codes. Her death sparked the country's biggest protests since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Canada's eastern coastline is seeing strong winds and rain as Storm Lee blows in from the Atlantic. It's expected to bring winds of up to 130 kilometres an hour to the province of Nova Scotia and to the US state of Maine. The US National Hurricane Center has issued tropical storm warnings for hundreds of kilometres of coastline, affecting some 9 million people. Temperatures have soared in parts of eastern Australia as a heat wave kicks in just 2 weeks after the country's warmest winter on record. Sydney is currently above 30 degrees Celsius, that's at least 10 degrees above average. Fire warnings have been issued in some areas, and the heat is expected to last until Wednesday. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Developing nations call for more representation in global decision-making, and we're at a major summit in Havana. Next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our main stories. Libya's top prosecutor vows to investigate both the current and previous governments for possible negligence after the floods that killed at least 11,000 people. And humanitarian aid still desperately needed in Morocco, a week after a powerful earthquake devastated remote villages near Marrakesh. China has reaffirmed support for the development of the so-called Global South at a gathering of 135 countries in Havana. Delegations at the G77 plus China summits have been discussing some of the big challenges facing developing nations and ways to strengthen multilateral cooperation. Well, our correspondent Luis Chirino reports.
Heads of state, prime ministers and leaders of international organizations from some 100 countries in Asia, Africa and Latin America arrived at Havana's José Martí International Airport and later were welcomed by Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel, the temporary chair of the alliance. The summit opened at Havana's Convention Center, presided over by the Cuban head of state, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and members of the Cuban leadership, including former President Raúl Castro. Representatives of the Global South aim to promote a new economic world order. They are looking at science and technology, innovation and economic cooperation, a point emphasized by President Díaz-Canel in his opening remarks.
Let us fight for a right to development, which is also the right to exist as a species. Only then will we be in a position to participate in the scientific technical revolution on an equal footing. Only then will we be able to occupy the place that is rightfully ours.
Meanwhile, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on the alliance to work hard to make the developing nations' goals a reality.
The voice of the G77 plus China will always be essential at the United Nations. And I count on your group, who have long been champions of multilateralism, to step up, to use our power and fight. Champion a system rooted in equality. Champion a system ready to reverse the injustice and neglect of centuries. And champion a system that delivers for all humanity and not only for the privileged. Thank you very much.
During the plenary session, representatives of different G77 member states put forth their concerns.
And where we have shared experiences, those shared experiences must be translated into structured, shared expressions in solidarity, in our interest and the interest of humanity. That is my simple message.
China, represented by Special Envoy of President Xi Jinping, reaffirmed its support of the Global South efforts for development.
China is the world's largest developing nation. We are ready to work with Cuba and other G77 members to open a new chapter in South-South cooperation, requested for greater development through stronger solidarity.
The meetings will continue in a second session on Saturday, when participants are expected to adopt a final declaration containing resolutions that address the current challenges facing the G77 plus China. Luis Chirino, CGTN, Havana.
And for the latest from Havana, let's speak to Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther. Philip, what can we expect as this summit comes to an end on Saturday?
Well, look, the way this summit looks is essentially a lot of government representatives, ministers and some heads of state and government giving speeches one after another, and that's what the second day of the summit is going to look like. A lot of speeches. 56 countries will be represented at the summit today, each of them getting their 5 to 10 minutes to essentially make their case. The day today started with the Brazilian President Lula giving his speech. He is one of many leftist Latin American leaders who are here, and Brazil, of course, wants to make up time, if you will, from the Bolsonaro years and improve the relationships it has, not just with the likes of Cuba here, but essentially with all countries around the world. That's something that Brazil did during the G20 summit in New Delhi, for example, also just last week. We also expect at the end of this summit, or maybe already in a few hours' time while these speeches are ongoing, the adoption of that joint final statement. Every summit like this one, every big political summit, is essentially judged by whether there is an agreement to a statement or not. We expect that to be the case, and we expect it to call for the establishment of a new economic world order. Essentially what these developing countries represented here, 134 altogether, want is a bigger role for the global south, more fairness in the world essentially for them. They represent a huge part of the world. It's 2/3 of the United Nations represented here in Havana, 80% of the world population. That is quite significant. That joint statement, by the way, we also expected to detail some of the obstacles that these countries are facing. And Cuba, frankly, where we are, is a good example of those that will most likely be named. Debt, inflation, climate disasters, hunger, these are all things that Cuba is suffering from right now. What we also see during this summit, as opposed to others that we tend to cover, G7, G20 summits, is that what you see here is also that there is a clear division between the Western world, the Western-led world, if you will, and the global South that is represented here. One example is climate change. The global South wants the industrialized world, the G7, essentially, to pay more for climate change damages. Also, when it comes to the war in Ukraine, there are huge differences, if only by the simple fact that it is almost not mentioned at all in the speeches here at the G77 plus China summit in Havana.
Yeah, interesting. And Philip, how much weight does the G77 group have beyond the group on the world stage?
Well, it's a big negotiating bloc. It's been around since 1964 and has become bigger and bigger since then. It's a negotiating bloc that functions within the United Nations already. We've seen it particularly strong in its negotiating positions when it comes to the climate change summits, for example. The G77 plus China is a very, very strong negotiating bloc indeed. Now, when it comes to what they decide here and this joint statement that will be published most likely later today, none of this is legally binding. And it also has historically been very difficult to get all of these countries on the same page, if only because there are so many of them, because they are so disparate, because they are so diverse as well. These are largely developing countries, but there are also giants that are involved here, the likes of China and India, and then also countries that, frankly, are very much developed at this point. Saudi Arabia, for example, gave their statement here just a short while ago. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres helped open this summit, by the way, and a lot of the representatives here will be traveling on to New York for the UN General Assembly, where they'll see him again. Guterres here, for example, telling the G77 plus Cuba to, quote, step up, use your power and fight. And he had previously said this, that, quote, the world is failing developing countries. He hopes that they will be able to put up a united front at the UN General Assembly in New York.
Philip Crowther in Havana, many thanks. On Sunday, UNESCO will decide on the latest additions to its prestigious World Heritage List at a meeting in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. Among the nominations are the old tea plantations of the Jing Mai mountain in southwestern China. Our correspondent Yang Jinghao looks at recent efforts to safeguard and preserve this historic site.
Jing Mai Mountain in Pu'er City is home to one of the world's largest old tea forests, covering an area of about 1,200 hectares. Some 1,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Blong ethnic group migrated to this region, where they began domesticating wild tea trees. Su Guowen, a highly respected local villager, says tea has played a vital role in the Blong community's life throughout the centuries. Initially used for its medicinal properties, fresh tea leaves gradually became a staple food source.
Previously, tea was regarded as a special gift and offered as tribute to honor our ancestors. Over time, we began using it to trade for farming tools and basic necessities such as clothing, footwear, sugar, and salt. This is why we say everything we possess is thanks to tea. Today, it has become a popular product, generating substantial income for our community.
The tea trees have been cultivated in natural forests, creating multi-layer ecosystem and promoting sustainable land use practices. In the vicinity of these tea plantations, you can find over 10 villages inhabited by various ethnic groups. This village is inhabited by the Blong people,
We can see the residential houses here still retain a traditional style. Symbols of tea are usually featured on the roofs of the two-storied pile dwellings. In the past, the ground floor was used to keep livestock.
Today, the space is mainly used to showcase various tea products and enjoy the popular beverage.
We've undergone significant changes. In the past, there were no interior decorations, and we lacked essential facilities like restrooms. Now we have all these amenities.
Over time, related tea culture has been carefully preserved and handed down through generations. In every tea plantation, an ancient tree is selected as the tree of tea spirit. Each spring, local residents hold a special ritual to honor these respected trees.
We want to let the trees know that we will be picking the tea leaves and showing our gratitude to them. Also, through this ritual, we pray for a bountiful harvest.
During the past decade, as efforts were made to achieve World Heritage status, Jing Mai Mountain has embraced rapid development and enjoyed a wider recognition.
Looking into the future, we should prioritize education to improve our people's quality. Then we need to better promote our ethnic culture to strengthen the villagers' understanding and sense of identity with it.
Su stresses that local people should also stick to the concept of protection while seeking development, as the ancient tea trees are irreplaceable. Yang Jinghao, CGTN at the Jing Mai Mountain, Yunnan Province.
And a last look at the headlines. Libya's top prosecutor vows to investigate both the current and previous governments for possible negligence after the floods that killed at least 11,000 people. Humanitarian aid still desperately needed in Morocco, a week after a powerful earthquake devastated remote villages near Marrakesh. And China calls for greater development through solidarity, reaffirming support for the global south at a major summit in Havana. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's The Agenda with Juliet Mann. For now, from all the team in London, goodbye.